Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Joint Planning Policy Committee. Welcome to anybody who's watching from the public. Item 1 on the agenda, appointment of chair. I'm going to propose Malcolm Prout, the second there, Councillor Walker. All in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you. Hand over to you, Malcolm. Our job's finished.
I don't think it is, Bob, actually, but thank you very much indeed. Can I just go through a bit of housekeeping that we've got to do? I'll just say welcome, particularly to the colleagues from Torridge, and thank you, Bob, for your work over the last 12 months. We've worked very closely together and hope to carry on that work in the next year as well. But thank you very much, Bob. Could you please turn off your mobile phones? And if you need to go to the loo, if you haven't got one of these, we've got some spare ones to go to the loo. We understand that this door is not working properly, so you're going to have to go out through the partitions and round through the other door if you want to go to the loos. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel fairly soon afterwards, I think. This morning we've got two parts to our work. We've got the formal bit, and I think you've had notice that. Sorry,
could I just finish the agenda and
Vice
Chairman?
Yeah, that's seconded. Everybody, are those in favour of that? Sorry, yeah, I got carried away reading the notes there. Anyone again? That's carried. Thank you, Bob. We've got a formal bit of the agenda, which I think most of us hopefully will have had a chance to read through it. And then later on, we were going to finish the formal meeting and then have a bit of a workshop to talk through some of the practicalities and how we see things moving on. So I'm hoping to get through the formal bit in under an hour so that we can have an hour at the end in the workshop and try to finish by 12 if we can. So without any more ado, then I'll go on to item number 3, which is declarations, apologies of absence.
I've received apologies from Councillors Bell and Warden, Chair.
Thanks very much. Item number 4 is the minutes of the meeting of the 20th of September 2024, pages 7 to 16.
On those, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any other issues? If not, those in favour?
Sorry, was it the Councillor Leather?
Councillor Leather and Councillor Walker. And those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you, that's carried.
I abstained to everyone at the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Matters brought forward, I have none. Item 6 then, declarations of interest.
I've received none, Chair.
No. We move on then between the agenda between A and B. There is no part B. So we'll move on then to item number 8, the revised National Planning Policy Framework. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to pick up that item. So your report, as part of your agenda, highlights the key changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. This was published back on the 12th of December and followed a consultation earlier in the summer. And members will remember that we discussed it in quite some detail in terms of the reforms and what was suggested. And we put a detailed response through to the government on behalf of both councils, based upon what we brought to yourselves and any further points that were raised at that previous meeting. So we're just going to discuss relatively lightly the key implications that are for plan making that are arising from that changes to the NPPF and other planning reforms, and discuss a little bit around the sort of ongoing reforms that are coming as well, just to keep you up to speed on that. It then seeks endorsement from members around commissioning of some evidence. We're fortunately in a position now where we feel we can move forward with some of that, and I'll explain why. What we haven't done, and what I don't intend to do, is go through in detail all of the changes that are in the NPPF. A lot of those are as per the consultation, and a summary is provided from the Local Government Association at Appendix A to your report. Most significant change for a plan making context is around the local housing need and the standard method and how we calculate our housing numbers for what we will need to deliver for the area. So just to clarify, the local housing need is an unconstrained assessment of the minimum number of houses that the government expects us to be looking to deliver for the area. It gives us our starting point for how we have to consider how much housing we should be delivering to the area. It's not the end point, and we can take into account local constraints, such as the national landscape or flood risk areas, or, for example, for North Devon, we've got Exmoor National Park, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So a change from the last National Planning Policy Framework that was introduced by the Conservative government is that they've removed the discretion around the local housing need in terms of our housing requirements. It is now effectively a housing requirement. Whilst I say there is some discretion for looking to reduce that number based upon constraints, there is an expectation that that will be our minimum housing number, unless we can robustly justify that we've got significant constraints locally that mean we can't do that. And the government have really made it pretty clear that it's unlikely that most areas that will be a possibility. There is an expectation that that will be the minimum number we're seeking to deliver. I will point out that there is a little bit of flexibility around North Devon. It's in that unusual position where the district boundary is different to the local planning authority boundary because of Exmoor National Park. Now, the reason that there's some discretion is that the data is only available that they use for the calculation at the district level. So you need to be able to look at how you alter that calculation to proportionally consider the area that may be outside of the local planning authority boundary. Now, in reality, if we look at our previous local plan, out of 17,000 homes, only 200 were attributed to Exmoor National Park's need. So in reality, we're probably looking at that as a baseline figure in any case in terms of that local housing need figure. So following the calculation of that local housing need using what's called the standard method, and that's been introduced and changed through planning practice guidance, we can then consider, actually, do we have any of those constraints that would mean that we need to alter that number? For North Devon and Torridge, that number comes out at just over 1,300, and that's an increase from what we were expecting under the previous standard method of around the mid 700s per annum. So it's a significant increase in the scale of housing that we may be looking to plan for through a new plan. That's probably the key fundamental change that comes out of the NPPF and the planning practice guidance changes from a plan making perspective that we will need to be considering. But there are a whole range of other bits in there as well. For a 5-year housing land supply and a presumption in favour of sustainable development. They've made a positive change, we think, in that they've actually given direct reference in there that we can still have regard to development, directing development to sustainable locations, about making effective use of land, securing well-designed places, providing affordable homes. So that it's a recognition that just because the presumption in favour applies and the so-called tilted balance, it's not a free-for-all. The normal planning considerations don't get thrown out of our determinations. So we still expect good quality development that's delivering sustainable development for our communities. I'll point out that the previous government had been considering removing the duty to cooperate from a plan making perspective. And you'll remember that that's about us working with our partners and with our neighbours to make sure that we're meeting needs in a coordinated and joined up manner, thinking about cross-border issues, thinking about where one authority cannot meet their needs, about considering whether or not that's something that the other authority should look to do. Now, we're already cooperating, of course, in terms of internally between North Devon and Torridge, but that's about thinking about our neighbours, such as Mid Devon, West Devon, etc. And of course, Exmoor National Park as our closest sort of partner in terms of plan making. The new government the Labour government intends to keep that. Duty to cooperate in place, at least for the time being. So that's a sort of a backpedal in terms of that. Whilst it's not perfect, we need to make sure that we are looking at that, and we're using some mechanism. And for us, actually, it's been quite successful. We didn't really have any cross-border issues that caused problems with our previous local plan. There's a series of transitional arrangements in place, particularly around that new local housing need. For local authorities that are progressing with their plans at the moment. Now, for us, that doesn't really bite. We don't get to benefit from any of those transitional arrangements because we're so early on in our plan making process. And they have pushed back the deadline for getting plans through the existing plan making system to December 2026 from mid 2026. Now, in reality, as I'm sure we'll discuss, that doesn't make a huge difference for us, because it's too short a period for us to get a plan through under the existing plan making system. What we don't have yet is any certainty around what that new plan making system looks like. That's still outstanding. The secondary legislation that would follow on from the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act from 2023. We know that the government is looking to progress broadly in step with what has been consulted upon previously. That's what's been intimated to us, but we don't have that as yet. So we expect further legislation and updates to planning guidance over the course of this year. And at the moment, the indication is that the new system will come into effect summer, autumn of this year. More likely autumn is what we're hearing. Notwithstanding this, there's a letter from the Deputy Prime Minister, which is Appendix B to your report, which is requiring all local authorities to put in place a new local development scheme or timetable for their plan making activity, and to notify the government of what that says by the 6th of March. So as a consequence for this committee, it will be necessary for us to come back to you at a special meeting, probably towards the end of February, just to ratify what we're going to put into that timetable. Now, there is an understanding from the government that if you're looking to put a timetable together for a plan under the new system, then clearly there's some uncertainty around what that timeline would look like, as they haven't provided us with the detail as yet. So it will be a best estimate of what that will look like. If you're preparing a plan under the existing system, then they wanted a prescribed set of very specific dates for the different stages of your plan. When you'd be going out for consultation, when you'd be submitting it for examination, when it was predicted for adoption. We clearly cannot do that with that level of certainty if we don't have the legislation and the understanding of the timetable. Table 1 of the report shows the government expected to publish other elements of planning reforms. So we're expecting consultation on national development management policies, probably sometime in the spring is what we're expecting. And then, as we say, the plan making regulations for Levelling Up Act into the summer and autumn. So there's still many things to come through this year. However, we are in a better position in that we have that certainty around our housing numbers. So upon that, that means that we should be able to now start to commission some of the technical evidence that we need to take our plan making forwards. For example, our housing and economic needs assessment, which underpins a lot of what we do. Because although they're providing us with an overall housing number through national policy, we need to understand, well, what does that mean for affordable housing? What does that mean for different sectors of our community? Those that are in care and looked after housing, elderly persons, for example. So we can now get consultants commissioned, hopefully, to work upon that and give us that level of detail that we need to start to be able to put a plan together. We also feel it gives us a little bit more certainty now that planning policy for travellers sites has been published alongside the National Planning Policy Framework around gypsies and travellers, and being able to look at commissioning a needs assessment. So the reason we weren't able to do that before was we were expecting a change to the definition of gypsies and travellers following some legal challenges on the previous definition. That has now been brought in through a revised planning policy for travellers. And then the other element is around strategic flood risk assessment. We feel that we can start to get some of that evidence commissioned around the modelling that we will be looking at at a broad brush level for the two districts. And that's something that's required and is unlikely to go out of date anytime soon if we get a head start on it. So to conclude, that brings me to the recommendations that are in your report, which is to note the contents of the detail around the NPPF and the wider planning changes that are coming in and are expected to come in, and to endorse the commissioning of that evidence that's required, early evidence to prepare the new local plan. And Chair, I'll hand back to you on that point.
Thank you very much indeed. I think very succinct presentation, clear. Thank you. Roman 2 is the important thing. If we agree today the principle of this, then obviously we talked about whether we've got enough money in the budgets of both councils to get on and do this straight away without any ado. And of course, this committee have got the powers to commission them as well. I think there's no need for it to go back to councils on each side. So we can get going straight away, can we? One thing I was going to ask about, I mean, I accept about the housing economic needs of travellers and flood risk. Do we need to do any more work on landscape in terms of thinking particularly about renewables and impacts on landscape and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so Chair, we have completed an update to the landscape character assessment. So that's been completed in the interim since we started work, or the aborted work almost on in terms of the programme for the local plan. You're absolutely right. We may need to look at work around landscape sensitivity. We may need to look around renewables and areas for search for where we would identify areas for renewables too. I think these are the first three that we think we can get running with quite quickly, and then we will have a whole tranche of other evidence that we will be looking at as well. We need to bear in mind our capacity to be able to commission and to also manage those pieces of work as well. But yes, I think there'll be a range of other elements, retail, leisure as well, those sorts of things we need to look at.
Members, Councillor
Jimmy, I'm just wondering, is there enough funding allocated for the works to be provided? Because quite honestly, you talk about the works and that. I'm just wondering, is the authority got enough funding allocated to the committee or the members to carry out these works?
So I can talk from a Torridge perspective first. We have a consultancy budget of £50,000 per annum. That's a line in our budget that gets renewed each year. I think similar amounts are available for North End, but Sarah Jane can probably comment on that shortly. And then we also have what's a local plan reserve, where we're able to draw down money for specific elements around local plan preparation, and also to make sure that we've got the money for the examination in the future. So I'm fairly confident that we've got sufficient funds in place at this point in time to be able to be progressing our work at the pace that you would probably want us to be able to do.
And just to confirm, Chair, it's the same position for North Devon Council. We've set aside reserves for this program.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hayne.
Sorry, on the renewables, it says the government's no longer requiring authorities to identify sites. Is that what you?
So there's not a requirement to. Yeah, we can still look at how we want to do that, how it's best to plan for renewables. So it's something for us to consider. We've obviously got the thematic working groups that we can have a look at that through as well, Chair, and then look at actually what's going to be the best approach for us in a local plan. Do we feel there's a need to do that? Should we be looking at criteria-based policy, which was something we explored last time around? Obviously, if we need that evidence, then we can look to commission it.
Sorry, also I did query the government, unfortunately, in terms of the future housing standards, has declined to say that solar should be put on factory buildings, large areas of roof, and has also stated that gas boilers are no longer required to be replaced. I did write to you to ask what your comments might be on that in terms of the local plan review, because obviously the solar bit was very strongly suggested at the workshops.
Yeah, I think we'll just have to explore where that goes, Chair. The thematic working groups are the ideal place to be looking at that. And we know the message coming through from some of our members is very strong on that, and we know that actually that can help with dealing with fuel poverty and such like as well. So
we still have discretion to do something about that.
I believe we've still got discretion. There's nothing that prevents us from looking and exploring going beyond building regulations, but obviously we have to be mindful of development viability as part of that as well. But it's all in the mixing pot, and it's the things for us to look at collectively.
Yeah, just another thing. Did we get circulated the comments in the consultation process for the NPPF, our council's comments?
Yeah.
Because it would be interesting to have seen that and compared with what the government has actually.
Yeah, so we have published those. We've got a section on our website now at Torridge where we publish our responses to national consultations. We can make sure that that's circulated to members of the committee.
Thank you.
The changes aren't that great, really, in the NPPF, are they? They're not completely wholesale.
No, they're not. I think the biggest,
Targeted.
yeah, they are targeted, and a lot of them do follow through from what was in the consultation. To be fair,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is undoing what was rapidly put in by the Conservative government in the December 2023 version of it, which did include a lot more discretion around where we go with things from a local planning authority perspective.
We were concerned about the imposition of the algorithm on the housing numbers. That was one of our big concerns, wasn't it?
It was, and unfortunately that was followed through.
But is there a sort of supplement to that system where you can take into account local needs or whatever? I'm not quite sure how it works.
The algorithm is supposed to take into account.
Yeah, so I can explain.
Anybody can understand.
Yeah, so there's quite
I think Ian thinks
there's quite a complicated.
I don't mean that rudely, but
Thank you, Jeff.
you might be the only person that does that.
There's quite a complicated formula that's in place to calculate that 1,300 homes per year for our area. It starts off now using your existing housing stock, which is a change from where it was previously, which was around your population and household projections. So
That was our concern.
yeah, absolutely. So it bears no resemblance as a starting point to actual need any longer. It is about the scale of your stock and a proportion of that. And and the government pulls no punches. It is about delivering that 375,000 homes per annum. That's what that formula is set up to do. And they've looked to try and deliver it as equitably as possible and distribute it equitably. Now, as planning officers, we have a difficulty, I think, with the affordability ratio. That pushes up and almost doubles our housing numbers for North Devon and Torridge. So there's a factor that's added on to your baseline requirement, housing need. And because our affordability ratios locally between incomes and house prices are quite stark, it pushes up our need. Now, our perspective on it is that pushing up our housing need number isn't going to address that affordability. It's the wrong tool, it's the wrong stick, but that's where we are. We don't have discretion around that. We have to plan on that basis. We challenged it through our consultation response. We have to now make the best of that and ensure that we're planning locally for our communities.
Councillor. Yeah.
I was just wondering historically how many houses have been delivered per annum. So how would that compare with the 1,300?
800 and something is our best figure, isn't it?
Yes, I think over the past few years, we've seen around about 800. I think I'm looking to Mark.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
Across the two districts. Before that, we've seen lower figures than that. I don't think we've seen a delivery of 1,300 at all, or if so, very rarely. So it is an exceedingly stretched target for our area. But alongside that is intended to come reform to the wider markets, to the house building industry. Whilst we've got those targets in terms of pushing through the planning system, we need the other end of it, the construction sector and the housing market, to also be reformed to allow for the delivery as well.
Anybody else got any? Well, we've had the debate before about the capacity within the industry. I mean, looking around locally, looking to Councillor Lane. I mean, I know talking to people like Paul Knox at Pierce's and Nick Loosemore and Peter Howe at Chichester Sands, the average age of the tradesmen that are living locally is going up and up and up, and people aren't taking the apprenticeship. So it is going to be a real struggle for the industry to get anywhere near these targets. That's for sure.
Brexit didn't help, did it?
Not for 8 years, is it?
But obviously, we will still be punished with 5 year land supply.
Yeah.
The reality is, Chairman, it won't be just us, it'll be all the country, because the same applies right across the country. In quite honest with you, I can't see them meeting the target we're trying to achieve.
I think that's true. Members, are there any other points anyone wants to raise, or are you happy somebody to move the recommendations and Roman 1 and Roman 2? Thank you, Councillor Walker. Is that second? Councillor James, thank you. All those in favour then? I think that's unanimous, is it? Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to item number 9. On the agenda, which is a
Chair,
Is
can I interrupt you a moment?
yes, sir.
Councillor James and myself are struggling to get into your Wi-Fi system, and therefore I'm listening to what's being said, but I can't see it.
Would you like to have paper copy?
That would be absolutely
Yeah.
fabulous.
I've tried several times.
No, we've tried, and we're just
Clearer not to know.
Yeah, to use the keyboard.
Luckily, the next item is a verbal update. So if you turn your hearing aids up, you should be able to.
I've got one yet.
I mean, this 5 year land supply issue is central to everything that we're doing at the moment. It really is important. So, Ian, this is you again. Isn't it? I think?
It is, yeah. Liz was going to have taken the first item, but it wasn't feeling so well this morning, Chair. So I picked that one up. So unfortunately, you get to listen to me for a second item. Yeah. The reason it's a verbal update is that we were just waiting for some legal advice to come through around 5 year housing land supply, because our situation is quite complex in terms of where we are in terms of the plan making process, the age of our plan, etc. So we wanted to make sure that when we publish an updated position around 5 year housing land supply, that we were getting it right. So following on from the 12th of December updates to the National Planning Policy Framework and to the standard method, it has a consequence for ourselves and other local planning authorities on 5 year housing land supply. And it's meant that we've had to reevaluate where we are with that position. Members will be reminded that we were in a position where we had a 5.18 year supply at a 1st of April 2024 base date, and then we've been successfully maintaining our 5 year housing land supply and pushing off challenge to that as well. So we're in a relatively strong position around that 5 year housing land supply. Now that was based upon our local plan housing requirement of 861 dwellings per annum. The introduction of the new standard method, as we discussed previously, pushes that up to 1,330 homes per annum as a requirement. So at that baseline requirement, you can see there's quite a stark difference in terms of what we need to be delivering over 5 years. If you were to multiply those figures by 5, it's quite significant. In reality, though, it doesn't turn out to be quite as dramatic as one would first think. So under our existing 5 year housing land supply, we had to include a backlog of what we'd under-delivered since 2011, the start of the plan period. So as we just discussed and following Councillor Copperhagen's question, we hadn't been delivering 860 homes per year over that whole period. So we have to add all of that up, that number that we haven't delivered, and we have to add that to our 5-year land supply. Now we can average it out over what's left of our plan periods up to 2031, but as we're getting closer and closer to the end of that, that number is getting bigger and bigger and bigger that we have to add in terms of that backlog. And it was actually getting quite dramatic in terms of that. The other aspect is that we feel that we can now move from a 20% buffer that we had to add to our 5-year housing land supply to a 5% buffer on our 5-year housing land supply. Now, in terms of the backlog, just to go back to that a moment, the way that the local housing need is calculated through that standard method, that includes consideration of any unpassed undersupply within that 1300, within that equation. It's already in there. So if we were to have to add it, it's double counting it. So there's no expectation that we include that backlog that we've built up since 2011 within it. That's why that other number is so high. That affordability ratio takes account of that. So we drop off that backlog. And the reason that we feel also that we can drop off down to that 5% buffer is that we're no longer looking at our housing requirement that's within our local plan, which tied it to that 20% buffer, but we're looking at the new provisions of the NPPF and the standard method and the local housing need. And national policy is very clear that you look to your housing delivery performance over the past 3 years to decide whether or not you've got a 5% or a 20% buffer. So we feel that we're able, in combination with these changes and the move to that standard method, that we can move to that 5% buffer. Now that's sensitive because obviously we've been challenged on that point previously, but that's why we wanted to make sure we've got this legal advice to back up our position. So what does that mean for us? It does mean that unfortunately we move to a position where we can no longer demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. But it's not a significant change in terms of the actual numbers. We're looking at moving from 5.18 years to 4.86 years supply. So not that far short of a 5-year supply, given the dramatic change that you would foresee from those numbers. And in reality, that shortfall only comes out 192 dwellings. So it's not a big number, Chair, in terms of where we are with that. So the position we're in now is that we're gearing up to prepare a press release for that. We're looking to get advice to our development management and planning committee colleagues and members. That hopefully will be going out today, so that it works in parallel with this meeting in terms of making that position public. Now that's clearly important in terms of our decision-making processes and practices, and allowing us to make sure that we're delivering an effective development management process. From a plan-making perspective, which is what this committee is concerned with, there are some potential matters that we need to consider. We won't go into them in detail, I wouldn't suggest today, but some of the things that we think of when we move to a position where we don't have a 5-year housing land supply from a plan-making perspective. Does it limit our opportunities to consider our development needs holistically and plan as a place on a whole? Is it meaning that it's going to undermine that a little bit? We did see that somewhat with our last local plan. Does it undermine some of our future choices on spatial strategies and locations for growth? Do we see planning applications coming forward that undermine our choices on some of those matters? Does it reduce our potential to promote delivery of more challenging sites and alternative development types, given that some of the things that are easier picks are likely to come forward? Does it constrain our opportunities to plan effectively for infrastructure delivery, for example? Does it restrict our potential to realise the most effective and appropriate development package for an individual site? So looking at that site-based process, given that the tilted balance would be in place, we don't have quite so much control over what a development might look like or what it might bring forward. Does it reduce the potential to apply new and enhanced policy requirements to new proposals in the interim as well? So we may see some of these big sites that we might have been wanting to look to allocate to meet these big numbers. Are we going to see some of those come forward as planning applications in the interim and have to apply the existing policy requirements to them when actually we might wanted to allocate them and apply new policy requirements, such as, for example, what Councillor Hames was suggesting earlier. And does it undermine, and I think this is an important one, does it undermine our community confidence in the planning system? Increase that apathy to engage with the plan making system and parish councils, our communities? Is that going to be problematic for us as we press forward with this plan making? So there's no recommendations to you. It's just to be mindful of those matters, to be reflecting on those things. And we need to be mindful of that from a plan making perspective, because it could have those consequences. So, Joe, I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take some questions. As I say, we will be looking to circulate further details to members and get a press release out on it.
I don't think it comes as a huge surprise to lots of us.
No.
But actually, the figure is a lot closer than I expected to see. So I think, I mean, there is some optimism that we won't be very long then without a 5-year land supply.
I think there's that potential. We can't crystal ball gaze. I think is the reality of it. We just don't know.
I thought that's what.
But that is a small number. 192 dwellings is relatively small, and we've got a lot of development sites that are being progressed at the moment. And we've got in Torridge around Biddeford Northern. If anyone looks, you can see that there's a lot of big building projects online. And actually, they've moved forward since we did our last assessment, so they will contribute more. So one could see that there would be potential that in fairly short shrift we could get back to a position. But until you do the maths, you don't know.
I got about 7 people now. Really. I'll take Councillor Walker, then Councillor Hackett, Councillor Lane, and Councillor Leather. Did Cheryl? No, I'll do it in that order, please.
Yeah, so in reality, we're looking at 192 short. So if we could find a 200, just over 200 plus, we'd be back in our 5-year housing land supply. Or is it not quite that?
It's not quite that simple. For example, if we were to grant a permission for 200 houses tomorrow, the likelihood is that we wouldn't be able to include all of that 200 within that 5-year calculation. We have to take account that it's going to take them some time to get onto site, to do the groundworks, and then they're only likely to deliver X number of homes per year, maybe in years 4 and 5 or 3, 4 and 5. So there would be a need potentially to find some more than that, but equally, as I say, some of our other sites have moved on since we last assessed it. So that could be the biggest difference when we reevaluate it on a 1st of April 2025 position. We may find that we've got a bigger amount of supply because some of those sites that weren't delivering in years 1, 2, and 3 will now be delivering in years 2, 3, 4, 5. Quite complicated, but hopefully you're following along.
Councillor Hackett.
I think I just had the answer to my question. We're next going to reevaluate on the 1st of April, so it will come out within a couple of weeks. So
Chair, in terms of that, our base date for our calculations is normally the start of a financial year, so financial year, 1st of April. It does take us some time. There's a bit of a lag of when we can actually do the calculations because we have to wait for building control data to come through, which can be a little bit late. We have to get in touch and contact developers to get updated positions on what they're looking in terms of their forecasts for their sites, etc. Now, traditionally, we've tried to do that probably by early summer. Over COVID and such like, it pushed back into November, but I think given the circumstances, we would be looking to probably expedite that and get it for an earlier picture.
So this is going to be an annual review on the 1st of April.
So we are required, and have always been required by national policy to look to update it annually.
Yeah.
Okay. So why have we got the figure now? In January,
because of the change of circumstances with our calculations of requirements, we've had to reevaluate it. So this will be an interim statement. The supply is based upon what we had before, so the 1st of April 2024. but we've updated the requirement fee, given that it's changed so dramatically.
So although we're this 192 dwelling shortfall, this figure would hold for the next year from what you're saying, rather than we'll be able to plug the gap much sooner.
So it'd probably be sometime in the summer that we would look to publish an updated statement on that. So it won't be a whole year. Normally we would only publish once a year, but given the significant change in national policy, we've had to publish this as an interim position. And we will update that again using our normal programme as of 1st of April 2025 base date.
Can I just add to that? Because we sought advice, didn't we? And we were advised that the MPPF took immediate
Effect. Yeah.
which is why we've had to do this, because otherwise we would be subjected to challenge.
And that was clarified by the lead on housing numbers at the Ministry of Housing and Local Government yesterday at a planning advisory service webinar as well. They confirmed the fact that yes, local authorities need to reevaluate their 5-year housing land supply immediately.
Councillor
Thank you, Chairman. Can I assume with the 4.86 supply now, of course, and the new numbers going forward, of course, it will soon be, we will soon have a reduced supply. I know that you were optimistic, but I think realistically it's going to get worse than get better.
I can't comment. I've
Well, I
seen my
wouldn't
position.
you wouldn't want to comment, but the reality is that with the numbers we've got to provide, we're not going to be able to do the supply we're meant to supply. It's a fact, because you've only got to look at the numbers you've done in the past and look at where you've got to go now. It's unachievable in quite honest with you. It don't take a lot of work, like does it? So I think now looking 12 months ahead all the time, I think it's probably too long.
Yeah.
I think in the interim, you need to be 6 months down the road, because quite honestly with you, we all know where it's going to. So I think we need to be aware that unless we move quick as an authority and try and allocate these new sites, we're going to get bombarded with hostile applications. And quite honest with you, that's not the way we should be planning the process going forward. I think
I've just said that there is a huge amount of work going on.
Yes,
with these new
Chairman,
sites.
I appreciate there is a huge amount of work which is already going on, but I think we need to increase that even more if we want to stop this hostile applications.
I know.
Thank you.
Councillor Leather.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Ian's explanation of the 5-year housing land supply has just pointed out once again what a ludicrous situation that 5-year land supply calculation always is. I mean, the last government did speak about doing away with it, and I was really hoping they would do away with it, but they didn't when they reviewed the MPPF. Now it's been fiddled with again, and this current government, who've come up with these ludicrous figures that they think people are going to be able to supply, they've kept it in. We're looking for at least 6 months where, as Councillor Lane's just said, developers are going to be able to come in with fields that aren't, and sites, greenfield sites, that are not in the current local plan for development. And the inspectorate will support them because the government want more houses built and more sites provided, even to the extent of building on greenfield sites in some instances. So, and we've no control over it anyway. We cannot control. And I take what Ian says about the sites currently under development. Yeah, there are in Bideford area. But we've got sites when we know how a 5-year housing land supply last time we fell out. We got sites now in the Bideford area, big one on Abbotston Road in Bideford. Oh, it's ready to go. It's not in the development plan, but because they got that, they got it. And it's for sale. It's been for sale for months now. Not ready. And smaller sites. All these 3 houses here ready to build, get them built. They're still not been built. So, you know, we're being taken for a ride over this, but we're stuck. We can't do anything about it. We've no control over how these houses come forward and are developed. The big developers still control the housing market. This government's done nothing about that. And that's the big disappointment. And we're stuck, like councils like us, are stuck struggling to try and the main point that you raised, Ian, is the lack of the community out there think it's our fault because we're letting it all happen, and it, you know, and they don't understand, you know, we're in a cleft state. So I'm bitterly disappointed about, and I do appreciate the work that our planning officers on both sides have been doing, struggling with this. It just isn't fair that the left to struggle out with it.
Yeah.
It's disappointing.
I think the one bit of optimism now than the last time we did on 5-year land supply is that the emphasis in the MPPF is still there in terms of, or is stronger about sustainability, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So it does allow us more discretion than we had last time, I think, on balance.
And certainly we're putting together a guidance note so that members and officers of Plan Committee and Development Management are aware of that and are directed to those aspects that have changed, so that we can make sure that we are delivering sustainable development and that actually it best meets needs. Absolutely, Chair.
Can you clarify that a bit more about what the change is on sustainability?
Yeah, so it's in paragraph 11D2, which is the presumption in favour of sustainable development. So it's around the tilted balance.
Yeah.
So they've added some wording, and it was always possible to do this. I'll point that out because you had to read the MPPF as a whole when you were making decisions under the tilted balance. But they have clarified, and I think that's important because it kind of sends an intent to developers and also to probably the planning inspectorates that actually the government wants good quality development coming forward, and it's not about housing at all costs, irrespective of what we hear. So it says it's around granting permission unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when they get assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole, having particular regard, and this is the new part, to key policies for directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places, and providing affordable homes individually or in combination. We've got all of those key tenets of policy that are cited in there around good quality, meeting needs, well-designed places. Effective use of land is an important one. That may be about delivering smaller homes that better meet needs as well. So there's all sorts of those different aspects that you can draw upon now.
Already in the local plan, right?
Those elements are already in there, but I think when the tilted balance applied, you had to look slightly differently at it. So I think by the government drawing attention to that, to me, is an important factor.
Could I pick up the point that Councillor Leather made too about the national house builders? I think we're in a different world, aren't we, now with these national house builders? They're funded these days in a completely different way from the old days. I mean, the old days of individual shareholders looking for the longer term and the return across 10, 15 years are gone. And I think the problems of Vistry, which is the biggest firm in the country, house building, you know, their financial troubles are all over the papers, aren't they, with their annual returns. So, you know, there is a real crisis here, I think about, and I think the MPPF does talk about making sure local builders and smaller sites are provided. But when we've got this sort of crisis on us all the time, it's very difficult not to look at great big sites as the priority, isn't it? Whereas, you know, the smaller regional developers have probably produced more.
Yeah.
And have got they can make the decision themselves.
Yeah.
And with pricing, because national house builders just will not, they'll just wait until the price, until they sell at a price. It's not a matter of you can't go and negotiate. You get a bit of discount, but you don't get huge amounts, do you? So it is a real problem with interesting. I was going to ask Mark, because Mark's the expert on the figures and the delivery. If we didn't have small, you know, there's a lot of things like park queues and one-off sites in villages, and what sort of percentage are made up by those smaller sites, sort of less than, I don't know, 10 or 15 and below in the annual figures?
Yeah, I would suggest that delivery is obviously quicker on smaller sites. I mean, certainly with regards to our strategic extensions, they have been very slow to deliver. As you know, we've only managed to complete phase A of Larkbere because Persimmon aren't necessarily interacting with the council. Lovells, thankfully, are now starting to develop Westacott. Phase A is in at the moment, the RM. Ilfracombe is very much a very slow burner. Probably a lot of that is down to the market. Temperature Homes, in terms of how much they are likely to deliver, over the next 5 years. But yeah, certainly, I would say anecdotally, smaller sites are quicker to deliver.
Yeah, well, on that point, I'm finding in our area, the 5 sites, the small ones, just aren't moving. They're just, some of the smaller builders are just not putting their money up, basically, with interest rates rapidly increasing material costs.
Yeah.
Several in my area that have been just sat there. And I've actually had a discussion with somebody recently about them actually doing the reserve matters themselves, because keeping the site going, because they just can't get anybody interested. In my own village, there's 2 sites, 5, that they can't get it. The market will always win, and the market is manipulated by big players. That's a fact of life. My concern a bit is how we look at the rural areas, because obviously one of the problems we're going to have with the devolution and all that is that we're being told we need to go for growth. And one of the detrimental things for us, particularly Torridge, as we haven't done enough growth in the past. And so we're looking at numbers, we're looking at economic centres, and we just haven't done it. We've just sat back and said the countryside. And I know there are some who want to keep the countryside as the countryside. But if we haven't got an economic driver, if we haven't got a growth economy, we are going to be on the back foot, really on the back foot. We won't even get on the back foot. We should be way behind. So I am concerned with that. The other thing is the relationship of affordable housing within this development. I know there's the changes going on with Homes England and they're regionalising and doing new plans. But we are not getting, in our area, we are not getting the take-up of social housing at the moment. So if we're not getting social housing take-up and the criteria is asking for a percentage, does that mean that the 5-year land supply becomes less achievable? Or are we just going to keep converting social housing into shared equity or part ownership or something just to say that we built a house?
Yeah, it's a real challenge in terms of that affordable housing aspect. We know that it's a national problem. It's not only something that's being experienced by the districts down here. Everywhere is struggling to get registered providers on board to be picking up affordable housing through the planning system. Now, there's a range of reasons for that, as has been touched on: increasing interest rates, challenges around rent certainties for RPs, and programs where they've got to invest in existing stock to bring them up to particular standards due to new requirements. So they're having to redirect some of their resources away, and also the National Affordable Homes Programme coming to an end at the end of 2025. So it is an issue. We work really hard to try and make sure that we are getting developers and challenging developers to make sure that they are doing all they can to deliver that required housing stock in terms of affordables. We really try to resist moving away from social rented where we can. It's only if it's absolutely necessary. And I know that Helen Smith, the planning manager, has got a whole programme that she's setting up to engage with all of the RPs to see how we can unblock that and how we can tackle that in Torridge. And I know that similar conversations happen over at North Devon as well. So it is a big issue. We don't want to lose that affordable housing stock because we know how precious it is, particularly as we are seeing our bigger sites coming forward at the moment, where there's that potential to deliver that larger amount of social rented housing. So rest assured that we're trying our best. And in terms of the rural areas, we've talked about this plenty. The new local plan gives us that opportunity to set out that blueprint and for us to make those decisions, for you as members to think about what you want to deliver. And we'll look at that as we go forward.
doesn't do a great deal for us on economic growth.
No.
And that's where we're wrong. You know, it's one thing to, if you get economic growth, you can support more housing. But just building more housing for the numbers without economic growth, going nowhere.
Yes, the government's put huge emphasis in this revision on social housing, and what indications are there that will be government support? I think there's a figure of 150. I can't remember what the social housing support figure is that the government's introduced. Is it 150 million?
I can't recall off the top of my head, I'm afraid, Chair, but you're absolutely right. The MPBF is really pushing social rented housing. But as for the package of support that comes in to help deliver that, I think we wait and see where that goes.
There's still 4 or 5 paragraphs in the MPPF about viability, which the developers chuck a lot of money out with consultants to prove, which negates the social rent all the time.
I was just going to add, the irony of it is actually you probably get policy compliance on non-allocated sites. As soon as you allocate land, all of a sudden it's not viable. But all the hostile applications that we've had over the last few years, they've all delivered at least 30%.
Yeah, that's the carrot to get,
Yeah.
to get the permission. Not permission to be cynical, but yeah.
Well, we talked about the HELA process and being more vigorous about dealing with the viability issue up front, so that we can get rid of those arguments at the DM stage. So there was a lot of work going on there as well. Councillor.
Didn't that necessarily all about registered provider and registered providers important was, I think we should be looking at providing low cost housing for local people to live in, which I think, which is the part besides social housing, right? Because quite honest with you, social housing, good, you're giving somebody a property to live in, but what they got at the end of it is nothing, because if you want to put security to people, you need to encourage people to get on the system and stay in the system. And when they get on the system, it works. And I think I think as an authority, we should be also, and I think the government's missing the trick here, they should be providing people, youngsters nowadays, housing at the right price so that they all get on the market and they're all into the system where they need to help to move forward. And I think that's the way forward. I think we need to incorporate that within the planning system when we move it forward, because otherwise we're going to end up with, we need social housing, but at the end of the day, we also need to get youngsters to be, look forward as well, which is that way further away.
I support them on that, because that's what the aspiration of most of our youngsters are.
Yeah, because
it's that, they don't say own life.
They want to own their own house.
To get on social housing. I know there's a bigger demand when you get bigger towns. You go back to the rural area and the demand is relatively small.
The other pressure we're facing too is people coming out of the buy-to-let market, isn't it? But some of the rents that people are paying in my village in houses that ain't that valuable really. I mean, some of them are, £1,100-1,200 a month. It's complete. Well, I don't know how they do it. But we can have less rented accommodation over the next 3 or 4 years, because people can invest their money and earn more money by just keeping the cash in the bank than leaving it in property. That's the reality of it.
And rent control, isn't it?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Can I try to draw this together? I mean, essentially, really, I suppose we need to note the situation, and we need to note the figure, I suppose, in the minutes, so that we can actually deal with the PR, the good PR and the bad PR. It'll no doubt come from the announcement. But Ian, thank you very much for that. Very succinct. Happy to just note the report, and thank you very much indeed.
I think it'd be useful to have it in writing, really. Quite difficult to get your head.
Yeah, Chair, we can certainly circulate our interim statements and the press release to make sure members get sight of that.
And obviously there's been additional legal advice, so it's only literally the last 24 hours, I think.
Chairman, it would be helpful
Adam's in it.
for all of the councillors for North Down and Ties to get a copy of that, you know,
Yeah.
because quite honest with you, it's going to affect their area.
We move on to a report, item 10. That was a happy day when we thought everything was fine and we were looking forward to be very optimistic on that day. But please.
Morning members. This item is to report to you the outcomes from the joint member workshop held on the 8th November 2024. The item will focus on the 3 growth-based activities that we covered in the workshop. So, as most of you were there, you know, it was up at Cadstown Business Sports Centre, and it was a mixture of members from both councils. The workshop was well attended. Each group had a mixture of members from each council as well to generate discussions around Aldbury Devon as a whole. So the aim of the workshop was to generate discussion around growth and to develop some key points to use as a basis for future discussions. Officers facilitated the workshop, started the day with context around local policy and the national policy which was relevant at the time. The scale of growth and housing requirements were set out with examples given to help visualise what may be required and to confirm that we're not starting from scratch with existing allocations and planning cushions that we had at the time. So planning for growth was recognised as not only focusing on housing, but also the need to plan holistically with consideration given to a variety of other areas. Activity 1 can be found on pages 57 and 61 of the agenda. This focused on what makes a successful place. Members were invited to suggest examples of places that they thought were successful. These were not limited to the local area, as it was just important to draw out some common themes or distinguishing features believed to contribute to success, no matter where these were. Examples were given from the local area, other places in the UK, and some locations abroad as well. Locally, as a sense of community and good local services made places successful, as well as the ability for residents to access town centres fit for purpose with services and facilities. In the UK, sense of place and diversity were more common themes of a successful place, and it was recognised that some places had clear investment to improve the area. In other countries, traffic-free spaces and excellent public transport were recognised as making places successful, alongside provision for convenient cycle routes. Good housing mix and vibrant atmospheres were also noted as making places successful. Many members felt that housing was key to successful places, as this can be planned to meet local needs and made suitable for local communities. It could be used to support success where it's well designed and of a high quality, and helping to reduce carbon emissions where possible. The right homes in the right places was noted as a key point by many. Many members also felt that community was important to success and that provision of spaces for people to meet helped create a sense of place. Communities where people feel happy and not isolated are keys to successful places, especially where healthy communities are encouraged. And it was felt that successful places encourage people to remain living locally if they want to and are able to support them in doing so. Infrastructure was felt to be an important factor. This covered a range of areas, and good public transport, especially in rural areas, and provision for walking and cycling were key themes for members. It was also mentioned that services and facilities were necessary to support success. Green infrastructure and play spaces were considered key in a successful place. They can make it somewhere you want to be, where you want to live, and they can help support healthier communities. As well as that, another infrastructure consideration was mobile internet connection, and good provision of these can help support successful places. A few points were raised around employment, education and retail. Successful places were noted as those with good employment opportunities and good wages, with education providing people with the skills necessary to get the jobs that they want. Many members felt that town centres in successful places have high streets which are used by and supported by locals. Activity 2, which is on pages 62 to 68 of the agenda, looked at the options for growth and aimed to explore what members thought would deliver the required growth and which options would be preferable. Each option had pros and cons provided by members. So for new towns, the main positives were around opportunities to deliver more affordable housing, to use more brownfield sites and force the delivery of infrastructure. It was also felt it would prevent disruption to existing communities and could offer a range of new facilities in a well-designed place. The negatives for new towns were mostly around the loss of the environment, loss of agricultural land, and difficulty building new communities. Some felt as though a new town may take investment away from existing places and not offer much, or just being used to the numbers. For new villages, the main positives were the ability to cater for specific needs such as retirement housing or the ability to create new facilities to support existing nearby villages. Potential for well-located and well-designed new villages was seen as positive, especially with opportunities to create an environmentally sustainable place. The negatives for new villages were mostly around capacity to deliver new infrastructure, provide the right services, and the ability to support strong communities. There were concerns about making such places sustainable. For growing the towns, the main positives were the potential for increased use of high streets and more support for existing facilities. Some liked the potential for more housing to meet needs and for economic opportunities which may become available. The negatives for growing the towns are around potential infrastructure challenges and the possibility of poor master planning creating badly designed place. Landscape issues and the risk of losing a sense of place were also considerations. For growing villages, the main positives were chances to bring forward affordable housing for local needs and having a chance to revitalise villages. Some hoped that this helped support existing services and facilities and felt development could be followed by further infrastructure. The negatives around growing villages were mostly the lack of existing infrastructure, transport-related problems, and limited access to facilities. There were concerns raised around local objections, and some felt that the growth would be too small to bring forward any affordable housing. For dispersed growth, main positives were around the support for existing places, potential for an improved sense of community, with settlements supporting each other as they grow and becoming hubs for people to meet. Negatives about dispersed growth were focused on concerns of scale. Some felt that this would need to be really carefully planned and it had to be in the right locations. There were some concerns raised around the potential for sporadic growth with the lack of infrastructure. Also a concern that this would contribute to unnecessary ruin of the countryside. Following that activity, some members raised that the options may be too simplistic, with suggestions that more context was added to responses. For example, instead of just agreeing to grow villages, it was noted that if this option was preferred, it may not mean all villages necessarily and may need to be proportional. Activity 3 is on pages 69 to 71 of the agenda, focused on the outcomes from a map-based activity exploring locations for growth. The maps on pages 70 and 71 of the agenda show the locations discussed by members at the workshop. Each shows potential locations for 3 different types of growth. This was decided by grouping the results from all the groups together and identifying 3 common themes. The first suggestion was for smaller sites around existing settlements, the second for larger levels of growth focused around existing settlements, and the third for growth located somewhere, which may be appropriate for a new town or village. On the North Devon map, the suggested growth areas are mostly focused around Barnstaple, with some along the A39 between Barnstaple and Bideford. Some is seen in South Molton and Ilfracombe, as well as scattered nearer to the border by Torridge. On the Torridge map, smaller growth is more spread out, and larger growth is close to Bideford and Northern. Suggestions for new areas of growth were located along main roads or near the border, close to larger areas such as Launceston. So just some final comments and the recommendation. It's important to recognise that this report provides an overview of the workshop. There may be specific individual comments which are not within the report. It may be the case that these were grouped with others into a wider theme. It's also recognised that amongst the 5 workshop groups, some may have different views. This does not suggest that all members agree with every point in the report. It simply aims to provide a summary of key ideas and common themes to give ideas for future work. And members will have further opportunities to build on the outcomes from this workshop. The recommendations are to note the findings of the joint member workshop as set out in the joint Central Plan Growth Workshop report. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, really good bit of work. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Haynes and Councillor Hash.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. Yeah, I think the report covers, mainly everything that we discussed. The only one I noted was, or one of the ones I noted, but was about green infrastructure, because I thought we did make the point that contributes to climate resilience, tree planting, etc., providing shading.
Yeah. Can I go back to the first item where you said that I've got a declarable interest here. I work for the British Horse Society. I'm an active access field officer for the South West. You talk about walking, cycling routes. Could you put in available for equestrians? So horse riding comes in, walking and cycling. I'm going to make a serious point here. Less than 2 weeks ago, at a little village in Altonan in Cornwall, a girl was put into hospital aged 8, and the horse was sheared off underneath her by a van, and the driver has been arrested for dangerous driving. So please, we've got a very rural community. Can we put it in? I replied to the consultation under a different app, but it just seems to be missed out all the time. It's in LTN 120. There are WHR assessments. It's part of active travel. I'm not going to keep banging on, but please put it in.
Yeah, so, I believe that point was made about the consultation, which was separate, but I'm happy if members agree to add it to the workshop report if we're able to do that.
Please do.
Yeah.
It mean a lot to me.
And resilience as well.
Cheryl, it's easier than doing the other.
I'm sure that I was there, but my name's not on the list of attendees. I'm sure I was. You was.
We was that
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the verbal report we just received on the villages is satisfactory. The written report on page 64, I find awful. My ward is full of villages. It talks of new villages and the problems with them. It doesn't get into the expansion of existing villages, but it doesn't seem to understand what a village is about in this report. In that they've got to be able to deliver more, or they would require more medical services. Villages don't get medical services. So what, why should a new village require it? We go right through it, saying after villages require churches. Every village has got more churches than it needs. It's closing them. Village halls, yes, they may well need it. And then we move on. Talking about somewhere it says about the villages need 1-bedroom units. That's not what villages need. The villagers, when they leave home and want a 1-bedroom unit, go to town or universities or cities. When they come back, they want at least 2-bedroom units because we want them to be breeding back in the villages.
I got to disagree with that one.
Then we move on to transport, there's no transport in the villages, so really it's saying they can't be because they're not sustainable because there's no transport. It's no worse living in a village like Buckland Brewer or Monkley than it is living up at Abbotsham Cross in one of the new houses. They've all got to drive.
It's important to.
So this whole page, I think, is questionable.
Well, but I mean, the thing I'd say is that this is an attempt to pick up what was said on the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than the policy documents, I think. But I mean, we can have that debate. I know Councillor James said something. I mean, there's a demand for one-bedroom accommodation in my village, and that's for older people, and that. Anyway, but I mean that's a debate we'll have later on in the local plan plan. I mean, but I think, you know, this is an attempt to pick up everything we said. isn't it?
Yeah, yes, Chair. It is simply a summary of what members themselves did say on the day of the workshop. So in future discussions, you may need to come back. about that.
Yeah, just to be fair to the officer, picking it up in that discussion wasn't easy. We won't shoot the messenger.
Any other issues anybody want to raise on the?
Can I just say, Chairman, I mean, villages and that, I think we do need to also look forward in the sense of maybe providing flats in some villages going forward, because quite honestly, people want to move out of their bigger houses, but they move into a flat in a village or something like that because they live all their life. I think that needs to be considered going forward. And I think you also, trouble is, we all want to build houses because it's great because you can get more sites in houses, but the reality is, I think we need to be building smaller bungalows as well because people want to move into smaller properties, and I think we need to accommodate for all because it's not what we're doing. It's we're missing the trick here, and I think we need to take that forward in the plan as well.
Charles, you're coming.
I was just wondering how it's going to be used. Will we be looking back on it in future, or yeah, it shouldn't just be forgotten?
No, so it's not just a one-off piece of work. It will be used as part of our evidence. We'll inform future discussions with yourselves as members. It'll be fed into our thematic working groups. So it will be reflected upon as we go forward. It's not just a document that we park and pop off on the shelf and forget about it.
And just on the villages there, I think there is a bit more vision needed on that. Yeah, because my own village is a real good example. Yeah, we built 1-bedroom flats in the shape of a 4-bedroom house 30 years ago. They've never been empty. It's the way that family life has developed. But we also built some bungalows. We had some self-build sites. And now we've just built a village shop, having already built a sports field and all that sort of stuff. So if you create the right environment with a mix of people, you can actually grow it rather than being too specific. I think there's an awful lot to say about how you look at doing it. Yeah, we still got village blacksmith in effect, which, because there's the demand. And demand and that will always drive what you do. No matter what we build, we can build and lots of stuff, but if it's not what people want, they then become disgruntled in the end.
Are we happy to note the report, accept the report as a reflection of the day?
Yes.
So, thank you very much. In which case, can we close the formal meeting? We actually got some biscuits and a cup of coffee and a cup of tea. So we have 10 minutes and then we'll get together in workshop mode just at the time of some actions we're going to take.